Imagine this. In 2010, the average household grocery bill in the UK was just $56 a week. Fast forward to 2024, and that same weekly shop now costs over $96. That's a 70% jump, and it doesn't stop there. Energy prices have spiraled out of control. Since 2020, annual energy bills have doubled, averaging nearly $2,000 a year. But here's what hits hardest. In a country where home ownership was once a badge of pride, it's now slipping out of reach. Mortgage rates have climbed to a staggering 6%, with average monthly payments soaring by hundreds of pounds. For renters, it's no better. Average rental costs have reached $1,100 a month, up 30% in just 3 years. How about wages? Surely they've kept up. Unfortunately, not. While inflation hovers near 6%, real wage growth is almost flat, making it harder for workers to stay afloat. Now here's where it gets shocking. Over 6.3 million UK households are in fuel poverty, meaning they can't afford to heat their homes properly. This winter, many will be forced to choose between warmth and food. All of this is taking a toll on mental health. 1 in 4 adults in the UK now reports high levels of financial stress, with many feeling like they're losing control of their lives. How did it come to this? How can a nation known for its wealth, innovation, and resilience fall into such dire circumstances? Why living in the UK has become a daily battle for millions? Let's dive in with the Atlas shift. Let's start with essentials. Things we need to survive are slipping out of reach for so many in the UK. Let's start with food. At first glance, it seems simple. Prices are up, people are paying more. But the reality? It's a tangled web of global crises, policy choices, and market dynamics. Food prices have risen by over 30% since 2019, with inflation for groceries alone at 9.2% in the past year. Why? Start with the war in Ukraine. Ukraine and Russia account for 25% of global wheat exports and 15% of fertilizer production. When these were disrupted, it triggered a domino effect across global food supply chains. The UK produces only around 60% of the food it consumes, whereas countries like France and Germany produce over 100% of their needs. This dependency on imports has made the UK more vulnerable to external shocks and global price increases. But here's where it actually got worse. Brexit. Importing food into the UK now comes with more paperwork, delays, and tariffs. These additional compliance costs have added around 6% to food prices. Furthermore, the UK heavily relied on EU workers for its agriculture and food processing sectors. Post-Brexit immigration restrictions have led to a significant labour shortage. In 2024, around 40% of farms experienced unharvested crops due to lack of labour. And yet, even as prices skyrocket, supermarkets face pressure to maintain profits. Major UK grocery chains like Tesco and Sainsbury's have been accused of keeping prices high, even when costs begin to stabilise. During the pandemic, many supermarkets absorbed costs to keep prices stable. Post-pandemic, there has been a trend of recouping lost profits, especially as input costs started to decline. A report found that UK supermarkets are adding 10 to 15% higher markups on food items compared to EU supermarkets. The longer-term contracts, the UK supermarkets tend to agree with suppliers, and producers are in part responsible for this. So, while European counterparts have been able to agree cheaper deals sooner, the grocers in the UK have been stuck in contracts at higher prices. Additionally, the UK's grocery market is dominated by a few major players such as Tesco, Sainsbury's, Asda, and Morrisons. This lack of intense competition allows for greater price control. The top 4 UK supermarkets control over 65% of the market, compared to less than 50% in countries like Germany. While discount chains like Aldi and Lidl operate in the UK, their market share is just around 15% of the grocery market, which is far lower compared to their dominance in Germany, where they control over 40%. This less influence from discount chains allows mainstream supermarkets to keep prices high without losing significant market share. Then there's energy, the beating heart of every home. A household in the UK now spends nearly $2,000 a year just to keep the lights on and the house warm. But why, when global gas prices have started to fall? The UK's energy crisis feels like an unrelenting storm, one that's been brewing for years. At its heart lies a global problem: volatile energy prices. When Russia invaded Ukraine, it wasn't just a regional crisis, it disrupted energy markets worldwide. Suddenly, Europe, heavily dependent on Russian gas, found itself scrambling for alternatives. Although the UK relies less directly on Russian gas, it wasn't spared. The ripple. effect sent gas prices soaring, and with gas generating 40% of the UK's electricity and 85% of house heating, the impact was immediate and severe. Then there's the issue of storage, or lack of it. The UK has enough gas storage for just 9 days of demand. Compare that to Germany, which can store enough for 90 days. When gas prices spike or supplies dip, the UK has little choice but to pay whatever the market demands. Further compounding the issues is privatized energy market. The idea was that competition among suppliers would drive down costs, but when wholesale prices shot up, over 30 smaller energy firms went bankrupt, leaving millions of households scrambling. Larger companies stepped in, but their tariffs weren't any cheaper. Even the UK's renewable energy efforts, while commendable, haven't been enough to stem the tide. Wind power now generates 26% of the UK's electricity, but what happens when the wind doesn't blow? Without sufficient storage solutions, the country falls back on natural gas. And then there's the housing problem. Most UK homes weren't built with energy efficiency in mind. Over 85% rely on gas heating, and poor insulation means higher consumption during colder months. Adding fuel to the fire, the UK's North Sea gas production has been in steady decline. Production has fallen by 30% since 2015, and environmental regulations have slowed new projects. This makes the UK more dependent on imported gas, often purchased at premium prices. LNG imports, for instance, face stiff competition from Asian markets, driving prices even higher. The government's energy price cap, meant to protect consumers, has had a mixed impact. While it initially shielded households, suppliers were eventually allowed to pass on higher costs. The result? The price cap jumped from 1,130 tours per year in 2021 to over 2,500 tours in 2023. For many families, this was the breaking point. But this goes deeper than just numbers. What happens when a parent skips meals to pay the gas bill? When a worker has to choose between affording a train ticket and feeding their family? Essentials aren't just getting expensive, they're eroding quality of life. The basics are now emotional decisions. And here's the chilling reality. This crisis isn't impacting everyone equally. Low-income families are hit the hardest. According to the Trussell Trust, over 1.3 million emergency food parcels were distributed between April and September 2024, a 35% increase from the year before. For businesses, the picture is equally bleak. Over 30% of small businesses in the UK report that energy costs alone threaten their survival. From local cafes to manufacturing plants, the energy crisis is closing doors. And then comes the housing costs and mortgage pain, where the numbers are staggering, but the human stories are even more heartbreaking. Buying a home in the UK is no longer a milestone, it's become a myth for many. But what's driving this crisis? First, the basics. In 2024, the average house price in the UK is $286,000. For perspective, that's over 9 times the median annual salary of $31,000. In London, the disparity is even more extreme, with average prices exceeding $525,000. This isn't just a crisis, it's a generational catastrophe. How did we get here? Let's rewind to the 1980s. The introduction of Thatcher's Right to Buy scheme, while empowering millions of council tenants, depleted the stock of affordable public housing. Subsequent governments failed to replace this stock adequately, creating today's supply bottleneck. Today, the UK builds around 200,000 homes annually, far short of the 300,000 needed to meet demand. Why does this matter? When supply doesn't meet demand, prices soar, and the Bank of England's repeated interest rate hikes to combat inflation have added insult to injury. The base rate now sits at 5.25%, the highest in over a decade. What does that mean for homeowners? For mortgage holders, it's devastating. The average monthly mortgage repayment has risen by over $500, pushing thousands of families to the brink. Nearly 50,000 households are at risk of repossession as they struggle to keep up with rising rates. Imagine working your entire life for a home, only to see it slip away because of economic forces beyond your control. And what about renters? With fewer people able to buy, the rental market is exploding. London rents have climbed above $2,500 a month on average, a 20% jump in just 3 years. Nationally, rents are up 12% year over year. But why? Blame the landlords? It's complicated. Many small landlords are exiting the market due to stricter regulations and higher taxes. This reduces rental supply, making competition fierce. At the same time, institutional investors are buying properties en masse, turning homes into profit machines. Is housing still a basic need, or has it become an investment game? For younger generations, the situation is dire. Millennials and Gen Z face the triple burden of high rents, stagnant wages, and astronomical house prices. Saving for a deposit feels impossible when over 40% of their income goes to rent. Will they ever catch a break? The government's attempts to help haven't solved the problem. Schemes like Help to Buy aim to assist first-time buyers, but critics argue they inflated house prices instead. Affordable housing targets remain unmet, and the promised reforms seem perpetually delayed. Can policymakers fix a crisis decades in the making? The broader consequences are staggering. High housing costs are not just a financial issue, they're reshaping society. People delay having children, move further from cities, or live in overcrowded homes. Now let's shift our focus to the job market and wages, a topic that affects everyone yet feels more urgent than ever. Despite being the world's 6th largest economy, the UK is grappling with a paradox. More people are working, yet fewer are thriving. But why? On paper, unemployment is low, sitting at 4%. Yet for many, work no longer guarantees a decent standard of living. This paradox has earned the UK the dubious title of the in-work poverty capital of Europe. How did it come to this? Inflation is a big part of the story. Over the past 2 years, inflation soared to 10%, the highest in 4 decades. Despite wages rising nominally by 7%, they failed to keep pace with soaring living costs. Real wages, those adjusted for inflation, have fallen by over 2% in the last year alone. So even if you're earning more on paper, you're buying less. But let's dig deeper. The rise of insecure jobs like zero-hour contracts, gig work, and temporary positions has redefined what it means to be employed. Over 1.2 million people are now on zero-hour contracts. That's nearly double the number a decade ago. What does that mean for the average worker? Zero-hour contracts offer no guaranteed hours, leaving workers unable to plan their finances or lives. A week might bring 40 hours of work, the next barely 10. How can someone build stability on a foundation this shaky? And it's not just gig workers. Across industries, full-time employees are feeling the squeeze. Median weekly earnings at $640 haven't kept up with housing, energy, and food costs. With essentials consuming over 60% of many households' income, what's left for savings or emergencies? Public sector workers are among the hardest hit. Teachers, nurses, and police officers have seen wage increases that don't match inflation. This is why we've seen an unprecedented wave of strikes. In fact, 2023 witnessed the highest number of working days lost to strikes since the 1980s. Why are those who serve society struggling the most? The regional divide adds another layer of complexity. While Londoners earn the highest wages in the country, the gap is eroded by the capital's soaring living costs. Meanwhile, workers in regions like the Northeast earn far less, creating a stark economic divide. After leaving university with an average debt of $45,000, many are entering a job market where entry-level roles pay just $25,000 a year. With rising rents and stagnant wages, how can a generation build a future? And then there's the looming shadow of automation. From retail self-checkouts to AI in finance and logistics, up to 30% of UK jobs are at risk of being automated by the mid-2030s. While some hail this as progress, others ask what happens to workers displaced by technology. The government's response? The national living wage has been raised to 11.44 an hour. But for a single parent working 40 hours a week, that's barely enough to cover childcare, rent, and food. Is this really a solution or just a band-aid? This isn't just an economic crisis, it's a societal one. Stagnant wages and job insecurity are breaking the promise of upward mobility. If hard work no longer pays off, what happens to ambition, to dreams, to the future of the UK? What do you think? Can the UK overcome this crisis, or is this the beginning of a new normal? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into global challenges.